I'm Sarah Maslin Nir of the New York Times, sitting in for Sam Roberts. Welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. This week, amid widespread concerns about young people's falling reading scores, pandemic-era learning setbacks, and growing digital distractions, writer and educator Peter Schmidt has reason for hope. But first, millions of Americans take antidepressants, some for years or even decades. Now, Health Secretary Robert Kennedy Jr.'s Make America Healthy Again movement is pushing a broader reexamination of how medications are prescribed, including how patients are helped when they want to come off them. That's the focus of a New York Times essay by Times opinion editor Camille Bromley. She spoke with dozens of long-term users about that experience. The essay has drawn more than 950 comments, with readers sharing stories of their own. She joins us now to talk about what she found. Welcome.
Hi.
So this was a doozy of a story that you worked on for a really long time, because this has been in the ethos for a really long time, decades. You know, the era when people were overprescribed perhaps, or just prescribed SSRIs. Now we're into 20, 30 years of this, and those people are coming of age and maybe trying to come off those medicines. So what have you found?
Yeah, as you mentioned, so this is by no means the debate around antidepressants is by no means new at all. However, after the confirmation of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as health secretary, he made what he calls deprescribing of antidepressants one of his agenda items. So it sort of brought that conversation more into the public eye and made it more visible. And I suppose I got interested. I mean, this story has been sort of a long road. It's been over a year in the making. But after his confirmation, I became interested in what he was calling the over-medicalization of Americans. And I just thought that was interesting to take antidepressants and frame them in this way. And most clinicians, or I should say the most prominent bodies in the psychiatric field, the institutional bodies, would say Americans are actually under-medicalized in the sense that a lot of people suffer from depression and anxiety more than ever before, and access to these drugs needs to be available. So that's sort of their position. But then I think, there's a contingent of people, including long-term patients, some of them, not all of them, some of them, who think that they were taking too many drugs, and they were taking too many drugs for too many years, and it harmed them.
Well, the backbone of your story is this one example of a young boy, really little boy, who had Tourette's syndrome, and he started having behavioral and emotional dysregulation really early on, and he gets on antidepressants at age 9, something his mother struggled with, and they helped, right, for a bit. And now, as an adult, he's having a conversation with you that it feels like it took away his personality, his ability to grow. What was that like, having that conversation?
Yeah, so, I mean, Cameron, he's about 35 now, and he really has changed his view on medication in his adulthood. So, he had problems in school, he had problems with anxiety, he had Tourette's syndrome when he was, he still has it, but it manifests more prominently in children. And so he struggled with that. He got on his pediatric neurologist prescribed him Paxil at the age of 9. And he also took many medications for Tourette's. But then when his tics subsided after his teenage years, he discontinued those medications, but he stayed on the Paxil, which is interesting, right? And so he just kept continuing to take antidepressants until now, until the age of 35. And more recently, he's come to question that decision and to think, okay, maybe taking this drug for so long has not been good for me. And a lot of his concerns focus around the fact that he has trouble in his love life. He has trouble feeling close to people. He really wants to have a family. He comes from a big family himself, so family is so important to him. He really wants a partner. He wants to have children. And he just has never felt this kind of closeness or love, that he knows is normal to have
Well, we have to take a very skeptical look here, right, as journalists. There isn't medical science that says being on antidepressants long-term leads you to have an inability to feel love, right?
It's impossible to say how exactly the antidepressants or other drugs have affected Cam, and he will say himself he doesn't know how he would have fared without them. Perhaps he would have had a lot more struggles without these drugs, and he fully, he's sort of like fully aware of the uncertainty of knowing that. However, a common side effect of antidepressants is what is called emotional blunting, where you just don't feel emotions as strongly, to put it simplistically. And that includes the good positive emotions, like affection and love. And then there is something called post-SSRI sexual dysfunction that some people suffer from. Cam didn't talk about that with me specifically, but that is something that's out there that people talk about and there's evidence for.
So what are the steps that are going to help wean people off drugs should they want to be, right? I think you said that this pressure is now making the practitioners have to take this seriously and have to figure out ways to safely, I think there was a word for it, I'm losing the word, but to get people off these in a way that isn't going to be harmful to them, which is not something that's been discussed in the past. Yeah,
not too much. It's a pretty new discussion. I would say most people use the word deprescribing. So just to back up and give some context here, I do think it's a minority of people who experience problems coming off of SSRIs.
Okay.
So from the clinicians that I spoke to, so people who deal with patients every single day, very, very rough sort of description of what they see, as they told me, was maybe a third of people who take antidepressants have no trouble at all coming off. They could stop cold turkey, no adverse effects. Maybe another third have some effects, meaning some withdrawal symptoms when they stop antidepressants, and maybe that lasts a couple weeks, but it's nothing too severe. And then another third of people may have more long-term or more lasting, more severe withdrawal symptoms. So again, those are very rough estimates, these are by no means scientific numbers, this is anecdotal, but all that to say that the majority of people are not gonna have problems coming off of SSRIs or antidepressants, but some minority of them will. And those people are the ones who really have not felt helped by their doctors. They've not felt like they've been supported in knowing how to taper off safely, how to do it without these really debilitating withdrawal effects. And so there's a subset of those people who go online and they find other people like them. And there's a lot of anger against, and I think rightly so, there's a lot of anger against the psychiatric field.
Why rightly so?
Because there are no, deprescribing is something that, if you look at Prozac came out in 1988, so it's been available for almost 40 years. And there are people who've been taking it for 30, almost 40 years now. And there's really no research on how to safely take people off.
Interesting.
And the guidelines are rough guidelines that are, okay, do what's called a short taper. So maybe you, again, it varies doctor by doctor. This is not standard advice, but maybe the doctor would say, okay, cut your dose in half. Let's see how that goes. And then let's cut your dose in half again a couple weeks later. And then maybe over the course of 4 to 8 weeks, you'll come off of your medication entirely. And that's the advice. And for some people, that seems not to work. It seems like that's far too fast.
How do you square the MAHA movement's contention and the health secretary's contention that Americans are over-medicalized with what the psychiatric and medical profession is saying, which you just started the conversation with? Actually, they're not. They're suffering more than ever with less resources or less medicine.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, when you look at the term over-medicalized, the thing I think that is seems to be the case is like there is a problem with what's called polypharmacy, where some people are prescribed drugs, and if they seem to work okay or at least have no bad effects, they're just kept on the drugs, and then those drugs pile up. And so there was one woman I talked to, for example, she's 70 now, and as of 5 years ago, and she was 65, she was taking 7 different psychiatric drugs, and she had never really had any big problems with mental illness. It was sort of like, as she described it, run-of-the-mill anxiety, some light depression, and yet she ended up on 7 psychiatric drugs. So that is something that can happen and seems bad. So like, drugs should be evaluated. I think most doctors would agree, and like there were some guidelines that came out earlier this year from psychiatrists who said that drugs should be evaluated, every year at the minimum, right? So if you're taking psychiatric drugs, your doctor should check in with you once a year and be like, how are these working?
Sort of stunning that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and it doesn't tend to happen because, the medical system is often, visits are too short, there's not enough individual attention. Psychiatrists are not even prescribing most antidepressants. Most of them are being prescribed by primary care doctors. Wow. And so there's not, primary care doctor is not going to have the level of training that a psychiatrist has to look at you and your mental health history and make a really personalized decision about what you should do going forward.
In our last minute, I want to focus on the fact that this was an explosive article. I mean, 950 comments, bazillion readers. Why do you think it hit such a nerve?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think that depression is a huge issue in this country, and depression and anxiety, like all the data shows that people are suffering more from this than ever. And what you choose to do about it is a great question. And like, there are always, as with any drug, there are benefits and there are harms, and those need to be looked at.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming to talk with us.
Yeah.
I know the article took more than a year, and it shows, so looking forward to seeing what you come up with next year.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Coming up, a fresh take on the future of reading. High school seniors are reading at their lowest level in more than 20 years, and many college students say they struggle to get through a book. Smartphones, social media, and artificial intelligence often get the blame, but my next guest says there's another side to the story. Peter Schmidt is a founder and the program director of Brooklyn's Strother School of Radical Attention. He joins us now to explain why he believes the future of reading might look more like a party. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you.
So I want to take us back in time, as your piece does so well. And the idea of sitting quietly with a book, which is what teachers and professors are bemoaning is not happening, is a kind of modern convention. Talk me through this.
Yeah, there have been many ways of reading throughout history, and what we mean when we're talking about reading right now is historically specific. There is a passage in St. Augustine's Confessions where he comes upon a bishop who is reading silently to himself, and Augustine finds it sufficiently surprising that he's reading without speaking aloud that he bothers to write it down and include it in the book. And so, of course, there's lots of scholarly debate about how people read in the ancient world, whether it was more out loud or more silent. But we know that literacy in the ancient world had a great deal to do with public recitations, with people gathering around together and having a central reader perform a text for a group of people. So it was a social, collective experience. I think with the advent of the printing press and the democratization of literacy, that way of thinking about reading fell out of dominance, right? Okay. So the kind of dominant image of a reader these days that's coming into question is a person sitting on their own, silently absorbed in a book.
And it's an introverted, not a collective activity.
Exactly.
It's interesting, right now the Odyssey is having such a moment.
Yeah.
People are buying millions of copies of the translation, but that was a recited work as well.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's a oral tradition, and an oral tradition is necessarily a social tradition because you wouldn't read it out loud if you didn't have an audience.
Yeah, not to a wall.
Yeah.
So you write that the future of reading is a party. Can you explain this? I kind of love it. I'm there. I'm ready for the party.
Yeah, we love parties. And we love reading too, and that's what matters. Everybody these days is really concerned with the decline in reading scores among young people, and that's a very real problem. What I'm arguing is not that we should abandon solitary reading, because that's a very important part of our culture and our education, and indeed, I think, of our politics. What I'm arguing is that reading has a very bright future in another direction, and that's the future of bringing people together for collective attention and collective experiences. What I'm writing about in this essay is the rise of gatherings all over the country, most of which are organized by young people, where people get together around a book. And the book is the kind of object of their shared experience.
And we're not talking about book clubs. This is like something different. Can you spell it out? Give us some examples.
Yeah, well, a book club, generally, you read at home and then you show up and talk about the book. This is, you show up and you read the book together. And so we had, for example, a dear friend of mine and an organizer in New York City organized a public reading of Howl in Washington Square Park. 300 people showed up. They had many people step up onto the stage and recite it out loud. My own kind of event that I co-organized with that same friend, Nick Plant, got people together in Dumbo at the School of Radical Attention and had people reading Whitman's Leaves of Grass out loud.
Nice. Do I contradict myself? And so what was that? What was the experience? So everybody read Whitman out loud. I think I read that you all went to the edge of the river and barked your barbaric yawp over the city skyline. What was the response to that from the participants? Were they old people? Were they young people? Who came out to read Whitman all night long?
It was 95% people who seemed to me to be below the age of 30. A few things were really affecting to me. The first was that it was just lots of fun. It got very strange. Whitman is himself kind of full of feeling in his writing. And so what we did is we experimented with all the ways that you can take words off a page and bring them to life with a group of people. So there were all sorts of wacky ways of reading together. It felt like a genuine party. At midnight, we brought out a cookie cake with candles because it was the night of Whitman's birthday. And we all sang, which was nerdy and cute. And then at the end, what I was most surprised by is that many people admitted that they had never read Whitman before. So the actual appeal of a shared experience and the presence of other people functioned as a sort of activation energy to get people into relationship with a text that they might never have encountered otherwise.
You could say your event contained multitudes.
It did, indeed.
Nerding out on Whitman. Well, that's very interesting to me. What about the pushback that a professor might say, that's not reading, that's a party?
Yes. Well, this is where it's helpful to think about the ancient world. And, every time we're talking about reading, most of the time these days, in the op-ed sections of major newspapers, we're talking about a very specific kind of reading. It's individual, introspective, principally between a person and a text, so it's private. And it has a lot to do with the transmission of information. The thing is, the transmission of information in isolation is something that our machines do very, very well. We all are carrying around little machines in our pocket that can transmit information to us far more effectively than books can. Now, there are many other functions to reading, I'm not saying that, but the function of reading as a chiefly informational technology, I'm arguing, is being displaced. And one of the other functions that these machines in our pockets have actually sort of compromised is the social function, is the ability to have things that bring us together and allow us to share attention and share experiences. And as it turns out, books are really, really effective technologies for bringing people together and giving them shared experiences. One
of the things you write to that end is that as an information transmissal machine. They're sort of falling behind phones, let's say, but as an experience mechanism, as a way to have a collective emotion around something. And I'm a book author. I actually have 2 romantasy books coming out in the spring. And one of the things I've noticed about that community is they're really bound together by the shared experience of it. It's almost as much about reading as sharing what you read and sharing the emotions and sharing that you read. And I wonder if the new ways that people are metabolizing books are sort of being overlooked as legitimate, because frankly those people in the romantasy space, which is the biggest selling book genre right now, are seen as a bit flip, a bit light. So do you think that there's a sort of staidness to the idea that reading can only be done this one way for it to matter?
Absolutely. I mean, my fiance is a romantasy audiobook narrator, so I know what you're talking about. They have the most extraordinary communities around those books. And I think you're right. There is something staid about the reaction that reading can only mean one particular thing. What we're seeing right now across the board is that technologies are disrupting the ways that we've always done things. And so there's a very understandable instinct to say we need to go back to what it was before. But that's not how change works. These new technologies shift how different things serve us, right? So the tool of reading, the tool of texts, used to fulfill one function. What we need to do now, if we want there to be a future for reading, is to find the thing that texts can do best for us.
Okay.
And it might not be the thing that texts did for us before. And the thing that I think people want right now, specifically young people, is to be together in the world, you know, to feel like we're in the same reality. And books can do that.
That's a perfect segue to a project of yours called a sidewalk study. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So this is a program that we do at the School of Radical Attention in Brooklyn, where I'm the program director. And it's a way that we get people together to read in new ways. And it has a very simple structure. 4 or 5 times a month in New York, and then 10 times a month in other cities around the country, people meet up at a spot, a cafe, a park, a bar. They read a short text. They do a close reading together. And then they go out into public space, often in pairs, and they do a practice of attention. They do an activity that's been pulled out of the text that leads them to give their attention to their environment, to each other, to other people, in ways that kind of bring to life the text in public space.
We're speaking at a very high level. Can you walk me through an example of this? Because what's a practice of attention? How does it draw you? What text do you pull from? Give me a real one.
A real practice of attention. Well, I can give you an example based on the Odyssey that you mentioned earlier.
Sure.
We have not done this, but it's I'm doing it on the fly, and it's an example of how it might look.
Okay.
You could read a passage from the Odyssey where all these characters have epithets, right? Which are little descriptors that make people kind of seem mythical and powerful. And then you could say, go out into the street and look at a person or look at a building and spend 5 minutes just looking with your partner and then come up with an epithet for them.
Interesting.
So it's a way of taking the text off of the page and into the world. It's a way of kind of putting the text on for size. And then what people do is they meet up at a second spot. So they started at point A and they end up at point B. Everybody circles up around a table. They order some drinks, or or if they're in a park, they don't. and they talk about that experience. They talk about what it felt like to read a text, and then they talk about how it felt to do a text, right? And the big idea here is that texts are not something that you just analyze and interpret. Machines can do that at this point very well. Texts are something that you do with other people.
Some readers might argue that reading can be social, but nothing beats the experience of getting lost in a book. And with lower reading scores, kids are losing the ability to do that. Is that just a sort of moribund idea, or is there a way that the type of events and experiential reading you're talking about can amplify that other type of reading?
Yeah, I'm a solitary reader. I really value that.
What, you?
Yeah, me. I think it really matters to have a space where you can be alone with your own mind in relation to some other mind from some other time. That's really cool. It has shaped me. And yes, I think that this different way of thinking about reading can complement the more individual way of thinking about reading. If you can read something on your own and establish a relationship to it privately, and then you can read something with people out in the world, then that text is functioning as a kind of thread that connects your inner world to your outer world. And our ability to share our inner world with our outer world, like basically me with myself and me with you, is a very important ability. And it's an ability that I would argue has been compromised by social media technologies, which kind of destroy the distinction between those two spaces. And so there are two different ways of engaging with the text. One is mine and one is ours. And the mine and the ours are both important.
So in our last few minutes, what can educators take away from reading your theories and from this type of practice and apply it to their schools, if anything? Or is this an extracurricular pursuit that takes place outside of a quiet library?
Yeah. Well, at the bottom of this way of reading, and really any way of reading, is attention. It's all about attention. And the question is, right now, what kinds of attention can texts make possible for us? Our attention is being commodified. There's a $15 trillion industry that makes its money off of, breaking to bits our attention and selling it to advertisers. Reading will play a central role in equipping young people to push back against that form of exploitation. So young people must learn to read in isolation. I think that's really important. But there's an entirely different form of attention that texts can give us right now, and that's collective attention. That's the kind of attention that makes you and me into a we. And that is something that teachers are very well positioned to create in their classrooms right now, and reading can play a part in that.
Great. Well, it's really wonderful to read a hopeful take on something that you often read in the pages of my own newspaper as doom and gloom.
Hope matters, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, and maybe we'll see you reading some Whitman out in the streets together.
You're invited.
Thank you. That's it for our show. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sarah Maslin Nir. If you've enjoyed these conversations and want to support more programs like this, please consider donating at the link on your screen. Thank you for watching.